Why did people in the Victorian era sleep worse than we do today? The reasons are not limited to everyday inconveniences. You will be surprised when you learn the truth. We tend to think of the Victorian era as a time of balls, elegant dresses, and strict etiquette. Pictures from that time paint a picture of a calm and measured world, almost perfect in its orderliness. But behind this facade lay a reality deprived of one of the main pleasures of modern life: healthy and sound sleep. What if I told you that nights were a real ordeal for Victorians, full of discomfort and anxiety? Their bedrooms, which seem cozy to us in old photographs, were actually an arena of struggle for every hour of rest. The truth about Victorian sleep is far from romantic and much more prosaic. In this video, we will examine not only the everyday, but also the deeper social reasons that prevented people from sleeping in the 19th century. We will look behind the velvet curtains of their bedrooms and see a world filled with stifling air, strange medical advice, and constant anxiety. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how harsh social constraints and living conditions turned an ordinary night into a real test of endurance, especially for women. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Victorian bedrooms. We tend to think that the main problem with sleep is noise or an uncomfortable bed. But for Victorians, the enemy was invisible and permeated everything. That enemy was the very air they breathed at night. The Industrial Revolution enveloped cities in thick smog from coal stoves and factory chimneys. This suspension of soot and chemical compounds did not disappear with sunset. It seeped through cracks in the windows, settling on furniture, bedding, and, most frighteningly, in the lungs of sleeping people. Inside the houses, the situation was no better. Popular gas lighting, which replaced candles, was a real technological breakthrough. However, it burned oxygen and released a whole range of harmful substances into the air, including sulfur dioxide and ammonia. Bedrooms were often small and poorly ventilated, as it was believed that night air carried disease. People slept with their windows tightly closed, turning their rooms into veritable gas chambers. This led to constant headaches and general malaise in the mornings. Heavy velvet curtains and canopies over beds, designed to protect against drafts, only exacerbated the problem. They accumulated dust and soot and prevented the circulation of already stale air. As a result, people breathed a poisonous mixture all night long. For women who spent much more time at home than men, the effects of this air were particularly severe. Their bodies were more sensitive to constant oxygen deprivation. This affected their well-being and quality of rest. Modern research shows that even a slight deterioration in the quality of the air in the bedroom dramatically reduces the effectiveness of sleep. Now multiply that effect by 100, and you get a rough picture of a Victorian night. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how the environment affects your own quality of sleep? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about what people actually slept on in the 19th century? Modern orthopedic mattresses have made us forget that a bed can be a source of insomnia rather than comfort. For Victorians, a comfortable bed was a luxury available only to a few. Most people slept on mattresses stuffed with straw, horsehair, or even corn cobs. These fillings quickly collapsed, becoming hard and lumpy. Every night, people had to find a comfortable position on a surface full of bumps and hollows. Over time, these natural fillings began to crumble, turning into fine dust. This dust mixed with soot particles from the air and created an unhealthy environment for breathing. Allergies and respiratory problems were constant companions of such sleep. Spring mattresses had already been invented, but they cost a fortune and were considered a luxury item. Even in wealthy homes, they were not always found. Therefore, even aristocrats often slept on rather hard and uncomfortable beds. Bed linen also added to the discomfort. It was made of coarse linen or cotton, which only became soft after many washes. New sheets could be stiff and unpleasant to the touch. The blankets were heavy and did not allow air to pass through well. They were often quilted, stuffed with wool or cotton wool. It could be hot and stuffy under such a blanket, but without it, it was cold, because there was no central heating. Bed frames were made of wood or metal. Over time, wooden beds began to creak mercilessly with every movement. This turned the attempt to roll over onto the other side into a real sound performance. Another feature was the famous canopies or baldachins above the bed. Initially, they were intended to retain heat and protect against dirt falling from the ceiling. But in poorly ventilated rooms, they created a closed space with stagnant air. Imagine trying to fall asleep on a lumpy mattress under a heavy blanket in a cloud of dust and stale air. Every movement is accompanied by a creak, and the body cannot find a comfortable position. This was a typical night for many Victorians. All this led to shallow and interrupted sleep. People often woke up and tossed and turned, trying to get comfortable. Many could only dream of the deep, restorative sleep that we consider normal today. But even the most uncomfortable bed was only part of the problem. Ready to learn how the mental state of Victorian women became the main enemy of their sleep? What I am about to show you was hidden behind the beautiful picture of the ideal family. Victorian society imposed on women the image of the angel of the home, a gentle, submissive creature completely devoted to her family. But this ideal had a dark side, total psychological oppression that gave no peace day or night. Women were completely dependent on their husbands, legally, financially, and socially. They had no right to property, no right to vote, and, by and large, no right to their own opinion. Their lives were subject to the strictest regulations, where any step out of line was considered a fall. This total control gave rise to deep, constant anxiety. Women were responsible for everything: running the household, raising the children, and maintaining the family's reputation. Any mistake, from burning dinner to poorly ironing her husband's shirt, could cause a scandal and reproaches. Managing a large house in the Victorian era was akin to running a small business. It was necessary to supervise the servants, keep track of expenses, plan menus, and organize receptions. All of this fell on the shoulders of the lady of the house, leaving her no time for rest and recuperation. Even at night, her brain continued to work, replaying the day's worries and making plans for tomorrow. How to please her husband? Are the children being raised properly? Will the cook quit? These thoughts swarmed in her head, preventing her consciousness from sinking into a deep sleep. In addition, there was a constant fear of public opinion. Any rumor, any sidelong glance from neighbors could destroy the reputation she had so carefully built. Living under the microscope of society was a source of enormous stress. Thus, the insomnia of Victorian women had not only physiological, but also deep psychological roots. It was a silent protest by an oppressed psyche against a world that denied her the right to rest. It was the price they paid for conforming to the image of the ideal woman. What if I showed you a time machine and transported you to 19th century London at night? You wouldn't recognize it. Forget about peace and quiet. Victorian cities were incredibly noisy, and that noise didn't stop even in the middle of the night. The main source of noise was, of course, the pavements. They were paved with stone, and the clatter of the hooves of thousands of horses pulling carriages and cabs created a constant rumble. Metal wheel rims screeched on the cobblestones, and the sound carried through the streets for many blocks. Houses at that time had no soundproofing. Thin walls and single window frames could not protect against street noise. Everything that happened outside could be heard perfectly inside, as if the action was taking place right in your bedroom. The cities did not fall silent at night. The early markets began their work long before dawn. The creaking of carts, the cries of merchants, the the mooing of cattle being driven to the slaughterhouse. All this began at 3 or 4 in the morning, mercilessly interrupting the already fragile sleep of the townspeople. Merchants also started their day very early. Milkmen with their clattering cans, coal merchants, junk dealers. Each of them loudly called out to customers, creating a morning cacophony. The concept of quiet hours simply did not exist. Industrial enterprises located within the city limits often worked in several shifts. The monotonous hum of machines and the clanging of metal did not stop for a minute. For those who lived near factories, silence was an unattainable dream. In addition, the streets were full of people at night. Taverns and pubs closed late, and their tipsy patrons dispersed to their homes, singing loudly or arguing. Shouts, laughter, and swearing were the usual soundtrack of a Victorian night. Church bells also contributed to the overall noise picture. They rang every hour and sometimes every half hour, day and night. This chime may have been poetic, but for someone trying to sleep, it was just another irritant. As a result, Victorians lived in a state of constant noise pollution. Their nervous systems never got a full rest. Even during sleep, the brain continued to process external sound signals, which prevented them from entering the deep stages of sleep. Do you think you could sleep in such conditions? But noise wasn't the only factor that interfered with rest. In the next chapter, you'll learn how the clothes Victorians wore continued to torment them even in their sleep. The clothing of the Victorians that we see in portraits appears elegant, but it was extremely impractical. This applied not only to daytime attire, but also to nightwear. The nightwear of that time was far from modern ideas of comfort. Women's nightgowns were made of thick cotton or linen. They were long, reaching to the feet, and had a complex cut with many gathers, ruffles, and lace. All this beauty could get tangled, press, and interfere with sleep. The collars on nightgowns were often high and fastened tightly. This was done to keep warm and maintain modesty. However, such a collar could rub against the neck and create a feeling of suffocation. Men's nightshirts were not much more comfortable. They were also long and loose, but were made of the same coarse fabric. The sleeves and collar could also interfere with and restrict movement during sleep. But the main problem with women's nightwear was the corset. Contrary to popular belief, many women did not take it off even at night. There were special, softer night corsets that were supposed to support posture even during sleep. Sleeping in a corset, even a lighter version, was a real challenge. It compressed the chest and diaphragm, preventing normal breathing. Deep, relaxed breathing was impossible, and breathing remained shallow and rapid. This meant that the body did not receive enough oxygen during sleep. The body could not fully relax, as the muscles of the torso were in constant tension. There was no question of proper rest in such conditions. All these layers of restrictive, non-breathable clothing turned the bed into a kind of cocoon. The body could not move freely, the skin could not breathe. Nighttime rest became a continuation of daytime confinement within the rigid framework of propriety and fashion. Are you ready for the shocking truth about Victorian medicine? When insomnia became unbearable, Victorians turned to pharmacists. But what they were offered as a sleeping pill would horrify any doctor today. The Victorian era saw a boom in the market for so-called patent medicines. These were mixtures and elixirs with secret ingredients that promised to cure all ailments, including insomnia. Advertisements for these remedies were everywhere, and people eagerly bought them. The main active ingredients in most of these sedatives were alcohol and opiates. Laudanum, an alcohol tincture of opium, was sold freely and cost less than beer. It was recommended for adults to relieve anxiety and improve sleep. Of course, these remedies worked. After taking such a mixture, a person did indeed fall into a deep, oblivious sleep. However, this was not healthy sleep, but a narcotic state that did not restore the body in any way. Addiction to such medicines developed rapidly. People quickly became dependent, and increasingly larger doses were required to achieve the desired effect. Attempts to quit led to severe consequences and even greater insomnia. Many women suffering from anxiety and chronic fatigue became regular users of these dangerous concoctions. Doctors often prescribed them opiate-based sedatives. Seeing no problem with this, it was considered normal practice at the time. In addition to opiates, sleeping pills could also contain other questionable ingredients. For example, chloral hydrate, which induced deep sleep but had many side effects. An overdose could lead to the most tragic consequences. Why did Victorians trust these dangerous mixtures so much? But even without medication, their nighttime diet did not promote good sleep. In the next chapter, you will learn what Victorians ate and drank before going to bed. The diet of Victorians, especially those from the middle and upper classes, was abundant and heavy. Dinner was the main meal of the day and often consisted of many courses. This tradition had a direct impact on the quality of their night's rest. Dinner was served quite late, around 8 or even 9 o'clock in the evening. It could include soup, fish, several types of meat with side dishes, pudding, and dessert. All of this was fatty, fried, and very filling. After such a heavy dinner, the body was forced to expend a tremendous amount of energy to digest the food. Instead of resting, the digestive system was working at full capacity. This prevented deep sleep. Heaviness in the stomach, heartburn, and discomfort were frequent companions of Victorian nights. Lying in bed, a person could not relax because their body was busy with hard work. Sleep on a full stomach is rarely sound and peaceful. In addition to food, drinks were also very important. Tea and coffee were incredibly popular and were consumed throughout the day, including in the evening. Little was known about the stimulating effect of caffeine at the time. A cup of strong black tea after dinner was considered the norm. For many, it was a pleasant end to the day, but in reality, they were getting a dose of stimulant that prevented their nervous system from calming down and preparing for sleep. Alcohol also played an important role. A glass of port, sherry, or other fortified wine after dinner was commonplace. It was believed to help people relax and fall asleep faster. At first, alcohol does indeed cause drowsiness. However, it disrupts the structure of sleep, especially its rapid phase, which is responsible for processing information and emotional release. As a result, sleep becomes shallow and intermittent, and the person wakes up feeling unrested. Thus, Victorians created their own sleep problems with their diet. A heavy late dinner, a cup of tea, and a glass of alcohol was not a recipe for healthy sleep, but for a restless night. They did not associate their poor health in the morning with their evening meal. Sleep problems were attributed to health, nerves, or the weather. The food culture of the time completely ignored the body's need for nighttime rest. Before the Industrial Revolution, people's rhythm of life was closely linked to natural cycles, sunrise and sunset. Sleep was not strictly regulated. People went to bed when it got dark and got up with the first rays of sunlight. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. The emergence of factories and plants led to the emergence of a strict work schedule. Now life was governed not by the sun, but by the factory whistle. The working day was long, often 12-14 hours. It began early in the morning and ended late in the evening. Time for rest and sleep was strictly limited. The concept of punctuality emerged, which had not been so important before. Being late for work was punishable by fines or dismissal. This created constant stress and fear of oversleeping. Affordable watches became widespread. Now time could be controlled down to the minute. The ticking of the clock in the bedroom was a constant reminder of how much time was left before getting up. Sleep ceased to be a natural process and became another duty that had to be performed within a strictly allotted time frame. This gave rise to sleep anticipation anxiety. People went to bed and thought not about how to relax, but about how they had to fall asleep in order to get enough sleep by morning. This pressure interfered with natural sleep. The more a person tried to fall asleep, the worse they did. A vicious circle arose. The fear of not falling asleep caused insomnia, and insomnia intensified the fear. For many, sleep became a luxury. After a hard day's work, a heavy dinner, and taking care of household chores, there were only a few hours left for sleep. The body simply did not have time to recover in such a short period. The attitude towards sleep itself also changed. It came to be perceived as something unproductive, as time stolen from work and useful activities. The ideology of the time extolled labor, and long sleep could be considered a sign of laziness. Thus, industrialization not only polluted the air and filled cities with noise, it changed the very perception of time and sleep, turning natural rest into a regulated duty and a source of constant anxiety. The darkness of the Victorian night was unlike ours. Without bright electric lighting, city streets were plunged into deep darkness that seemed alive and full of danger. These fears penetrated homes and disturbed peaceful sleep. Crime rates in sprawling industrial cities were high. Newspapers were full of stories about robberies and assaults. People were afraid that thieves might break into their homes at night. The locks and bolts of the time were not very reliable. Therefore, many slept very lightly, listening to every rustle outside the window or creak of the floorboards. Any suspicious sound could make the heart beat faster and drive away sleep. This fear was especially strong among women who stayed home alone while their husbands were working the night shift or away. They felt vulnerable. Sleepless nights spent in anxious anticipation were common for them. In addition to real dangers, there were also irrational fears. The Victorian era was a time of spiritualism and interest in the supernatural. Stories about ghosts and spirits were incredibly popular. Many people sincerely believed in the existence of the afterlife. The silence of the night and the play of shadows from a candle or gas lamp could stir the imagination. Any strange sound was attributed to supernatural forces. This fear of the unknown was reinforced by religious upbringing. Sermons about sins and punishments made people fear not only the real world, but also the spiritual world. Night was perceived as a time when evil was particularly strong. The modern idea of the bedroom as a purely personal, intimate space was alien to Victorians. For many of them, the bedroom was not a secluded refuge for rest. Its functions were much broader, which did not contribute to quality sleep. In large families, especially those who were not very wealthy, several people could sleep in one room. Children often slept with their parents or in the same room with each other. There was no question of personal space and quiet in such conditions. Even in wealthy homes, the bedroom was not always a private space. In the morning, servants would enter to light the fireplace, bring morning tea, or help the owners get dressed. The boundaries of personal space were very blurred. The bedroom often served as a place for morning visits. It was normal to receive a close friend or relative while sitting in bed or wearing a dressing gown. The bedroom was an extension of the living room. Moreover, the bedroom was not only a place to sleep, but also to work. Women did needlework, wrote letters, and read. Men could review business papers before bed. This mixing of functions prevented the brain from associating the bedroom exclusively with rest. The bed was a place for sleeping, working, socializing, and even eating. This violated one of the main principles of sleep hygiene: to use the bed only for its intended purpose. For women, the bedroom was often the only place where they could enjoy relative privacy during the day. But this privacy was illusory. At any moment, it could be interrupted by a visit from their husband, children, or servants. In addition, there was a practice of separate sleeping for spouses, but it was only available to very wealthy people. who had huge houses. Most husbands and wives shared one bed. Different sleep rhythms, snoring, or restless behavior of one partner inevitably disturbed the other. The lack of a clear boundary between the rest area and the waking area did not allow the psyche to fully switch to sleep mode. The bedroom did not provide a feeling of security and comfort. It was yet another stage on which social life was played out. Thus, the Victorian bedroom was far from an ideal place to rest. It was overloaded with functions, people, and social rituals. It was the last link in a long chain of factors that made Victorian sleep short, restless, and ineffective. We see that behind the facade of strict Victorian morality and outward order lay a life full of domestic discomfort and psychological pressure. Poor sleep was not just an annoying nuisance, but a systemic problem generated by the very fabric of the era. Polluted air, uncomfortable beds, noisy cities, and rigid social constraints all combined to rob people of their nighttime peace. This was especially evident in the lives of women, whose oppressed position made them hostages to constant anxiety. Their insomnia was a silent cry from a soul locked in the golden cage of the family hearth. The history of Victorian sleep is a reminder of how closely our physical well-being is linked to the social environment in which we live. Today, we take comfortable sleep for granted, without thinking about how far humanity has come to achieve it. Perhaps, learning about the nighttime torments of the Victorians, we will appreciate our quiet bedrooms, comfortable mattresses, and, most importantly, our right to personal space and peace and quiet a little more. Which of the problems described in the Victorian era seem relevant to you today, albeit on a smaller scale? Does the noise of the big city or your stress levels affect your sleep? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next historical investigations.